So I'm delighted to introduce my colleagues Andrew Packman and Jennifer Awes Freeman, who will be in conversation with one alum and two students. Our most recent alum, Dustin Wilsor, and then students Isabel Nelson and Elliott Love. So we're going to go in three sets of pairs and then have some conversation. And I think Dr. Packman and Isabel Nelson, we're going to kick it off.
Dustin.
No.
You're Dustin.
You're Dustin. I knew that. Andrew Packman and Dustin Wilsor are going to kick it off.
All right, good to see you all. Good to see you, Dustin.
Good to see you, Dr. Packman.
Dustin, who's at my back, there he is. Dustin was in the capstone seminar, which I was very fortunate to get to teach this past term, and is doing remarkable work. So Dustin, I'm eager to engage you on a couple of questions about what your experience at United was like. So maybe you could kick off by just saying how your experience and studies here at United have shaped your vocational path.
I think particularly in capstone class, I discovered that it didn't so much change my vocational path as kind of made it louder. In capstone class, I went back and looked at some of the questions that I asked when I applied here and realized that through my journey, what I've actually done is answered all of those questions and then figured out what I wanted to do with the answers.
So that's so interesting. So can you maybe bring us into that capstone project and kind of what was the fruit that bore?
What I discovered was the way we can use the kind of our cultural surroundings, popular culture, entertainment, and kind of the community that forms in reimagining what worship looks like and what it means to be a faithful follower of a larger power.
I wonder if you'd share, I mean, not to put you on the spot, but I would just love for you to kind of flesh out the kind of concrete example that this bore out in Seattle and the kind of liturgical work that you were up to out there.
Yeah, so what I developed kind of a method of engaging a congregation in worship in a kind of full collaborative way. I came up with this, I decided that we as human beings are constantly being pulled toward collaboration with one another, whether that be kind of naturally falling into step with each other as you walk down the sidewalk, or as applause turns into a unified rhythm when you're at the theater, or even kind of our body's natural willingness to have our heartbeats and our breaths and our menstrual cycles sync up. And I think that is God's call for us to work together in community. And so I've been discovering ways that I can utilize my community of worship to do the work of leading themselves through the discovery of biblical stories and then the interpretation therein.
No, it's such an interesting idea about how there are these kind of deep rhythms that bodies have that liturgy can kind of sync up with or not. We feel it when they don't link up. And one of the most interesting link-ups that I found in your work was this parallel that you were drawing in your work between musical theater on the one hand and Christian liturgy. And I would just, go ahead.
Yeah, no, and I think what I found most fascinating as I was studying it was I think that it's easy to kind of read liturgy and biblical parallelism into lots of fictional stories. But what I discovered was that in the community that finds a home in musical theater, we find something very similar to a community that finds a home in a church. And I think that those two things are playing parallel parts in helping us see the kingdom of God in the world in the way that we create community together. and that's in kind of its ritualistic manners, in its liturgical manners, and in kind of the exegetical and hermeneutical exploration of the text.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. And this, the kind of generativity of both of those spaces, that there's interpretation happening, that there is this kind of fully embodied thing that's happening, strikes me as so interesting. And it's also, it strikes me too that in the capstone class, this was something we were kind of enacting week in and week out, where together all of these different projects were being kind of birthed and emerging from this larger collaborative, collective process. And so I just wonder if you would say a bit, you've been a part of a couple of these kinds of classes, also the arts practicum. Just what is it like to be in classrooms with other people that are trying to do this similarly innovative, imaginative, embodied work, and to watch those projects kind of push and pull and press against one another? Can you just comment a bit on that kind of creative process?
I think then I'm going to kind of look at Isabel here too, because she's been a part of both of those processes with me. And I think that what's amazing about it is that other people are hearing your ideas and they know what your project is, and maybe they're working on something similar or something completely different, but they come across something, then it makes them think of you. And the number of resources that I got from my fellow students because they thought of my project when they were trying to find something for themselves, and vice versa, I don't think that I ever would have had the richness of resources that I had if it weren't for that kind of collaborative state.
Yeah, thank you, Dustin. Should we pass around to?
Sure.
Yeah.
So let's bring into the conversation Dr. Jennifer Awes Freeman and Isabel Nelson.
Hi, Isabel.
Hi, Dr. AF.
I've had the pleasure of having Isabel in a few classes over the last several years, and have gobs of things that I would love to say about you, but but wondering if you could just start by narrating some of how United and your studies here have impacted what you perceive your vocational path to be.
Thank you. It's such a good and rich question. And hello to everyone in the room. I'm sorry I can't be there with you in physical space. By way of introduction, I'm Isabel, use she, her, they, them pronouns. So I came into United as somebody who already identified very strongly as a theater artist, and in particular a devised and physical theater artist. So someone who's accustomed to making art in deep collaboration with others, and kind of seeing how embodiment can help us the stories that we live and tell in the world. And kind of came to United because I felt intuitively that there was a way in which my work as an artist and a sense of spiritual grounding that I was really hungry for, and my commitment to the work of social justice, I felt like those three things were all really connected in some sort of deep and fundamental way. And I was really hungry for language and space to explore that. And United has been that space for me in a really powerful way in terms of like what it's clarified vocationally for me. Similar to what Dustin said, it's felt like a deepening and a clarifying, like things have sort of started to come into, I mean, I want to say sharper focus, but that makes it feel static in a way that I don't think it is. But I think there's my time at United has really allowed me to recognize the truth of my impulses, and then also give me a stronger sense of my gifts and how I can link into the larger work that's going to take all of us to kind of move the world to a more beautiful and just version of itself. So does that answer your question? I feel like I maybe lost track of the specificity of the prompt, but that's where I'm going with it right now.
You answered it perfectly.
Great.
In every way.
Just call me Mary Poppins.
Maybe along those lines, I guess I'm wondering how, because kind of like Dustin, you came in with, like you just narrated, a strong identity as an artist. You had an inclination, looking for some theological and spiritual grounding. And my perception of your time here is that you have found that and you continue to develop it. I'm wondering if there's if you could talk about some specific examples, maybe in a particular class. It doesn't have to be one of my classes necessarily, but you do what you think is right. Or a specific assignment, something like that. Thinking of like, where are some places where you've seen this kind of exercised, or that you've gotten into it?
Okay, I'll bite. I mean, I think that there's a lot of classes that have felt deeply formational to me. Not to like, I feel like this is going to come off as something that's not, but literally each of the three of you have taught really, really formational courses for me. Theology for Social Transformation with Dr. Green, my very first summer, was phenomenal. Many classes with you, Dr. Awes Freeman, but certainly Arts Practicum comes to mind, as well as the capstone with Dr. Packman this last semester have all been really, really powerful courses. The arts praxis classes, I think the one that I'll kind of center on a more specific example. And I think one of the things that was so powerful about that course for me was, for those of you in the room who may not be familiar, the Arts Practicum is really centered around a personal creative project that everyone works on kind of over the course of the semester. And the course itself is really scaffolded as sort of a supportive container and space for us to work through that creative process together. So it's less about kind of reading textbooks and that sort of thing, although we did have some of those, and much more about really feeling where the Spirit was leading us in a creative sense, and living into that and leaning into that. And for me, because of where we were in the pandemic and also some personal circumstances, I kind of went outside of my comfort zone insofar as not creating a theater piece, and found that not only was that process really powerful, the creative process itself, but then the culmination of the course and being asked to speak to that piece in theological terms really gave me the nudge and the provocation I needed to make some explicit connections between theology and the arts in a way that, again, had felt sort of intuitive to me, but I was shy about articulating. And the opportunity and the call to really put those things together in a single breath and put particular words and textures to them that felt like a particular offering of mine was really powerful, and also provided a really wonderful foundation for papers I've continued to write in classes like constructive theology, or even in Dr. Packman's capstone class as well.
Great. Love this. One more one more question before I pass it to my colleague, Dr. Green. And maybe going from that, and this is not entirely a fair question because you have another year or less here at United, just a few more classes, but as you're moving towards the completion of your program at United and the kind of the beyond United horizon, I'm curious how your time at United has impacted your vision for your vocational kind of future, or where you're anticipating that this work might lead you.
Yeah, absolutely. I get this question a lot, particularly as somebody who didn't come to seminary to pursue congregational or like explicitly religious leadership.
I don't mean
So
it in a literal, what are you doing after graduation?
no, I
It's
know,
more philosophical.
but I think it's also helpful to like note that context that like for some folks it is maybe a clearer step. And so for me, even coming into United, and this is held true for my time. Oh, well, and I kind of want to get at this in a couple of different ways, but one piece of it is that it's important to me that I say that I think United has helped. I am more myself now than I was when I came to United. And that I think is a direct result of the conversations I've had here, the ways in which I've been pushed, the conversations I've had, the things I've read, you know, these classroom environments and assignments, and the questions that I've really been asked. And I don't, and vocationally, it's allowed me to sort of connect on an even deeper level with my my artistic identity as a theater artist. There was a time as I was coming into United where I was like, maybe that was a season that's drawing to a close, and now I know that is not true. So it's kind of guided me back to parts of myself that feel really central. I'm very, very fortunate that my day job right now is you can see my workspace. I work in the Lealtid Suzuki Center for Social Justice at a small liberal arts college in the Twin Cities. And so I feel that there's ways that I'm already integrating my learning at United with the work that I do here. And I'm not quite sure how to articulate this. And I feel like it would maybe sound like an unsatisfactory answer to any other audience but this one. But there's something about the space that United has opened up, both in terms of like my grounding and my sense of self, and in what I can feel I can offer, that allows like spirit to move and to sense like a sense of calling and opportunity. I feel like those have already started to emerge in recent months. And so whatever comes after this vocationally is mystery at this point, but feels like it will be a deepening into the things that I've always known to be true, but now have a firmer foundation in as the result of my time.
Thank you, Isabel.
You're welcome.
Great. Thank you. And now we want to invite two more voices into the conversation, Dr. Gary Green, who's joining us by Zoom today, and student Elliott Love.
Well, hello again, Elliott, and hello, everybody. It's good to see you, sir. And I'm coming to y'all from Zoom because my son, Elliott Green, gave me a stomach bug that I just could not shake before today. So bear with me if I'm a little cloudy, but we're going to make it work. So, Elliott, this is a unique situation because I've had Isabel and Dustin in several of my courses, and I have never had you in class. So I'm looking forward to potentially having you in class one of these days. But you and I did have some opportunity to interact at the Black student group meetings every now and then when Karen was here. And I know that you come to United from the world of law, right? So
yes, indeed, yeah.
You has to do with the vocational path, and I'm curious, how has your experience or your studies at United changed at all your vocational path, even if it hasn't taken you out of law, but how it has kind of informed your engagement in it?
Yeah, it's a great question. I feel similar to Isabel and Dustin. My guess is a lot of students at United would feel the same way, that that deepening of the path instead of so much a changing of the path is something I can relate to. I came to United. I had graduated law school. I hadn't taken the bar yet or anything like that. Through my work, got really frustrated at the fact that it seemed like there was this breakdown where people would say, well, you're their attorney, you're not their pastor, you're not their therapist, you're not their social worker. And I felt like in a lot of instances you kind of are in those, for somebody in those situations. And I also at the same time had some pretty negative experiences in the religious communities I was a part of just feeling like people weren't taking enough action and doing enough work. So I thought, let me go to seminary and try to tie these topics together. I feel like through United, specifically through being able to, before I even came to the school, I talked to you about what my opportunities might be here, what type of research I might be doing, and you were incredibly helpful. I've had Dr. Awes Freeman, Dr. Sabia-Tanis, a bunch of other professors who've, I think there's a format at United where you show up with a vocational path and no one questions it. They just encourage you. And I think that's part of why there's a deepening instead of like a push. I think that the faculty here are largely to thank for that. So yeah, I don't know if that answers the question, but
That does.
I think that's a big part. And then also the students as well. You guys aren't privy to the Zoom chats, but there is a lot of very helpful information that goes on in the Zoom chats that is, yeah, it's just very helpful, very fruitful conversation.
I really appreciate the point you made about how, you come to United, students come to United from all different professions, vocations, and there's not this sense that you have to then move into like these buckets of vocations that fit seminary. But in fact, there's theological education can disperse throughout all kinds of different experiences. And that, in a way, we kind of get an opportunity to redefine what theological education is and what it can look like in the world. I'm curious, kind of related to this question or the first question, how has your experience or your studies changed you? And I asked that question as somebody who, when I went to seminary, that's really what did it for me. It was learning about what I thought I knew already, traveling to a different part of the world that just opened me up to a whole new existence. So I'm curious kind of to hear you narrate to what degree has that been like for you?
Yeah, I think it, and I hope this isn't some sort of, I'm just making it make sense in my head, but I feel like it's worked out like very well. It made me just a better person. It all kind of fell into place very nicely, which is cool. So similar to, I took a class with Dr. Sabia-Tanis, the first class you take in the social transformation or like series of courses, where you're supposed to come up with some sort of a project that you want to work on theoretically or in real life. I knew I was going to be, I hoped I was going to be passing the bar and starting a firm, going out on my own to do work. I wanted it to be a nonprofit, and I thought it would be kind of cheating to use that plan as my plan for the class. So I thought, let me jump in and come up with a different topic. So I came up with this idea of, I'm not the first person to come up with community organizing, but I found in my work that a lot of people had deep knowledge of subject matters, custody issues, divorce issues, landlord-tenant issues, things that are hugely important in lives, but that at least out here, you don't have a right to an attorney for. I think in the Twin Cities, you might get an attorney for landlord-tenant issues. But it's a big issue that you have all this deep knowledge, but no connection to the procedural issue of how you would go about things. And similarly, there's this break because everyone says they're not your priest and they're not your pastor, they're not any of these things. There's this break between what's happening and the social transformation, the activist work that's happening in the community. So I wanted to tie those things together, and I've been able to start doing that. I became an attorney like a month ago, so it's been it's recent, but I've been able to start doing that thing. And thanks. Yeah. through that process, though, to answer your question about it changing me, I think through the work of everything I've done leading up to this, through that class, through the conversations you have at United, even for me, like you said, redefining theological education. For me, really, I think of theological education as challenging or reinforcing the basic premises of my beliefs and of beliefs in society, sort of those dominant norms. And I feel like through all of that work, the action of doing that has just made me just a better version of myself. I feel like I don't know. I don't think you cannot be changed through doing those things.
Yeah. Nice.
So it's yeah.
Thank you. So shifting gears, and you mentioned being in Dr. Sabia Tanis's class and several other courses you've taken. I'm curious, because one thing I think United professors write really creative assignments in classes.
Mm.
So I'm curious if there's one specific assignment that you've done for a course, that you're drawing from in your work, or that is uniquely connected to your vocational work, or even yourself. I mean, what assignments stand out and how?
I would say, first of all, I would say that there's, again, just a credit to the faculty here. I at least haven't experienced a class where there hasn't been an ability for me to tailor whatever work I'm doing to something that's useful to me.
Right.
It sort of feels like it's just ingrained in the system that there's no point in doing it if it's not going to be useful to you. This
Right.
isn't, and I've just found that to be hugely helpful to have that freedom to do that, to tailor assignments in that way. I would say, obviously, Dr. Sabia-Tanis' class, the project that I came up with there that I'm literally doing now, I find hugely helpful. But also in Dr. Wheeler's class, What is Religion? I kind of went off on like a deep dive on the critical study of religion, and it really, again, to sharpen the focus is, I guess, the only phrase. I don't know. It just helped me to better understand what I'm talking about when I'm challenging dominant cultural norms that don't seem explicitly religious, because it's like kind of there's a long history to the term, but it's been very helpful in being able to do that work. So being able to have that assignment of just write anything about what is religion, basically, just answer the question, what is religion? We just spent 12 weeks talking about it. It was hugely helpful for me, personally, in my work, and and in the class, obviously, too. It's
Well, last question, and it's a perfect segue, because you were in the What is Religion class and having to wrestle with religious, what's not religious, those questions. I'm curious, how has your imagination about religious leadership changed at all since coming to United? What is religious leadership to you, and how has your time here shaped that?
I would say that's a really great question. I would say, I think before I came to United, like many people, I would pose a question like, what is religion? Or, well, that feels religious. But I feel like now I can actually back up what I'm saying. I feel like now there's been this deepening of the work that I'm doing when I'm in community with people, when I'm doing that work, I don't have to say like, well, is it religion? Like, well, we're doing kind of this, and I don't have to have that sort of I don't know, whatever you call that I feel like a lot of students might have prior to coming here, where I feel like I'm doing work in community with people, trying to just deal with any form of oppression people are facing and trying to build a better world. I feel like that is religious leadership. I don't know if I'd so much say leadership, more like followership. I don't know, semantic, I guess, but that's I just feel like it's deepened that ability for me, and to feel very comfortable and to be able to encourage other people to feel that way as well. You don't realize how many conversations you have that are religious, or that perhaps if you're me, you just change conversations to be religious, and that's not normal for other people, but it just happens a lot. So yeah, been hugely helpful.
Excellent. Well, thank you, Elliott.
Thank you.
I would love to get the three students kind of in a conversation together. So I was just listening to all of your reflections, and it's interesting to me that nobody's on like a kind of clear and direct path. The kind of meandering nature of all three is evident to me. I think that's an interesting thing. That's not a problem, that's interesting. And I also think that this question of what religious study or theological education brings to this is also really interesting. And so we've also heard this morning some reflection on the kind of changing religious landscape in the US, and the changing kind of the careers to which students move into out of a seminary degree, that it's not quite so direct a pipeline into congregations as it used to be. And so I would just love to hear each of you think about what's valuable about studying religion, this kind of elusive thing that no one can quite pin down, that's kind of always on the move, in a world and in a religious environment where everything is kind of on the move. And the kind of virtues of flexibility and curiosity and wonder that might be cultivated. Anybody of any three of you that might have something to say to that, I'd love to hear your thoughts.
I'll take a swing. And in some ways, I just want to sort of reflect back your formulation of the question, Dr. Packman, because for me, that sort of gets to it. In that, you know, the value of undertaking this investigation, and I think this is also reflected, as you noted, in all of us sort of being like, it's still in process, it's still unfolding, like there's a deepening and also a sense of mystery. We could be speaking about the divine just as surely as we could be speaking about our vocational paths. So I think, and I'm going to obviously kind of put my cards on the table here as a budding process theologian right now, like those have been the theologies that have really spoken to me. But I think that this line of inquiry and type of study feels like it. I'm not quite sure how to articulate this, so forgive me in advance. This will be very much in rough draft, but like it sort of brings me closer to a sense of the sacred and the divine, because it helps me sort of get to the heart of things. It like there are all of these layers that are really important when we're thinking about our existence, and we're thinking about like the struggles that we engage in as a human race, like and there's like something abiding underneath it all, and being able to hold both of those things and move between those layers is a gift and a lifelong endeavor that I think allows us to engage more fully in the work of being human too. Yeah, not I also don't know, right? Like, but that's some of what's coming up for me, is like, well, the value is that in some ways the study of religion is the work of life, like the trying to understand why we're here, how to live, how to be in community. It's deeply important and joyful work.
I want to call out, Isabel, something that you said to me just a few weeks ago, which is you're a better person because you're in seminary. And I think that's true. And that's what it's all about, right? Is I also, budding process theologian, but the world is constantly being recreated. And so our theology God is constantly being recreated, right? And that's what we are learning here. And I think I envision religion in the future looking something completely different from what we think and know right now. And we're in the work of recreating it right now.
Yeah, I would just also say that part of the reason why I've noticed, at least this is just my guess on why a lot of students at United don't have like a clear path, is because the clear paths like aren't really great at doing the things that people are at United to do. Like if it was easy to be a congregational minister and accomplish the work that I wanted to do, I would probably just do that. Especially like some of them have some pretty decent retirement plans, like could make that work. But it's just not, those paths don't really exist. So that's kind of, I think, why this is a group of people who are attempting to sort of forge that path to some degree. So yeah, I think that's important. I also think it's important, to the point of theological education specifically, I think it's important to be able to answer questions about, you know, I did a lot of work in the world of like political science and then of course the law. And I feel like there are basic, like I said, basic premises that underlie things, like you should be able to own the earth and sell it for as much money as you personally want. That if you don't challenge that basic premise that's just accepted as a neutral belief, a lot of questions or a lot of points that people make about the environment don't really make sense. So I think that in my experience, theological education, more so than philosophy or anything else, is an environment that allows you to challenge those sort of dominant norms.
Well, I was going to pose a question to break the Zoom wall. So you all are here with an audience of folks who represent many generations of United, and I wondered if and you all are joining into that esteemed body. I wonder if there are things that you want to tell the folks gathered here about what does it mean to be a seminarian today, or any questions that you have for the audience members. And then I'm going to turn it around and let them ask questions of you. Anything you want to say about what it means to be a seminarian now, or questions you want to pose?
I mean, I just want to, I guess, name really quickly, like, I think the experience of being a seminarian at United is not necessarily the experience of being a seminarian at lots of other places. I find myself in this conversation a lot with folks who are not at United, where they're like, oh my God, seminary sounds amazing. I'm like, it does. Not all seminaries are like yeah, so that's one thing that comes to mind for me, although it doesn't answer your questions.
But that's all right. Yeah, I'm getting affirmation that it did answer the question, so.
It's at least being a seminarian at United means being forced to be in a creative space. And I mean that as a positive remark. I came to seminary thinking of myself as a creative person, and I wouldn't ever have imagined seminary being the place that made me more of a creative person.
Well, and I think that ties in so strongly to what you were saying earlier, Elliott, about like needing to sort of creating the spaces to do the work that we're called to do, that are not just necessarily the well-trod kind of avenues that we've seen in past generations. Not that there's, we're always informed by our past, right? And that not that those aren't of value, don't have things to offer, but that there is something really generative about the constructive space and the creative space.
I completely support all that. I guess a question I have for the audience there would be, how has United, first of all, has United always been like a cool little weird place? Like, is this a new thing? And I guess secondly, just I'm curious from, the outside looking in, what the view is on the work that that students are doing. There's just it's such a weird little, I mean, there's just so many things. And again, with the creative thing, I've learned so much about art just being in this program. That is nothing, shouldn't on paper have anything to do with art, so much. So anyway, just wanted to throw that out there. But yeah, I'm just curious about those things for anyone in the audience.
Great. Anyone want to take a response? Meg's got a mic in the back.
Yes. So I graduated in 2015, and thinking back, I mean, when I was at United, things have shifted for me when I was in the work, and you wouldn't imagine what I'm doing right now. And I'm also, like, my background after finishing high school was law. So I'm speaking to Elliott, but I did in Madagascar and I didn't finish until the end. But then I switched to management and more marketing, and then I came here. But now I'm in social work. I'm a senior social worker in mental health. So so I don't know if that answers your question. But I appreciated about United is how I was able to use art, especially music is what I did. And that was my thesis was around music. And I'm still using it. I'm not singing professionally, but I sing here and there. And every time I sing, people are, like, they see the presence of God, and you don't have to always mention God, but God is everywhere, and even psychology, psyche is in Greek is spirit, soul, So yeah, it's everywhere. And arts is like that too.
I came to United in September of 1980, and I was kind of hoping, looking for maybe some like more spirituality, more people who would be teaching me how to be more pious, maybe. That didn't happen. But it taught me a lot, being at United taught me a lot about being a person and being, you know, because these people who were going to be ministers were just people, right? Well, I grew up in a minister's family, so I sort of knew that, but not really, you know? And then they kind of dragged me kicking and screaming into seminary. Not my parents. I don't know, life, God, spirit, whatever. And it just, being here taught me a lot about asking questions and not necessarily coming to answers, but living out the questions day by day, learning how to understand the mystery and the power of word, both the word of the Bible and the word in my spirit and the word of the world. All those things coming together. And just meeting people, meeting my husband, that was good.
Yeah, this is good.
But I don't think that there's another place, another seminary like United anywhere.
Thanks, right behind you. There you go.
When I came to United, I had been a public school teacher in a middle school outside of Chicago, and I found that the educational system that I was in did not have any creativity and actually deterred a teacher who might have tried to bring creativity to the classroom. And so I was seeking creativity. I was seeking a type of education that was not traditional. And I also was very spiritually alive and believed very much in the work of the church. So I came with those feelings and identities, and I chose United because it was already showing its creativity in the way that it designed its classes. I had looked at CTS in Chicago and at Vanderbilt, and United, which was really not as well known as those other seminaries, had a greater light, a greater sense of community, a greater sense of evolving. And so I'm not surprised, even though I came to seminary and was in a more traditional path than maybe any of you were. I mean, I wasn't going to be ordained and I wasn't going to serve in the church proper, but it turned out I was ordained, and I've served my whole period of my life in the church, the local church. But that was creative too. You know, that process of being moved, and I know the faculty had a lot to do with that, not trying to talk me into ordination or being in the church, but help me discover what my options were and where I was called. I think the way United is now, what you've gone through at United, is just the right outcome of United. I mean, I think United was starting that in a more traditional way, perhaps, when I entered in 1974. But I could see with the quality of the leadership in the seminary now, with our seminary president, Molly, that it's all gone in a direction that was just a part of what it was. As the world changed, so did United. So I'm thankful for all of you graduates and your not unlimited futures.
Great, thank you.
My first semester, Don White explained process theology, and I've heard many of you mention it. as we've been talking. I grew up a preacher's kid, so I'd heard the stories, all the stories from early childhood. And I had never, my mom always said I was a modern day Timothy, that I didn't rebel against the church, I just grew in the faith. But it was process theology that made all the change for me. And from that point on, people would say, well, what are you going to seminary for? And I would say, I don't know. I'm becoming who I will be when I need to decide. And it was one semester left, and in 1 week, all the reasons why I should do interim ministry went through my mind. And by January, I was doing my first interim. So to me, that's what UTS is about, is teaching us theology that makes sense in this day and age. Learning Old Testament from Carolyn Pressler gave me a gift of teaching about the Old Testament every place I went, and that was a delight. So it was a highlight of my life to be going here and meeting all the different students and faculty and staff who have made this such a great place through times. And I, by the way, met my husband 55 years ago while he was at UTS. Yes. So it's a gift to so many people through time, made possible by God and by people being open to God to let the process take place.
Wonderful, thank you. Are there questions that folks would like to pose to the students or faculty who spoke? Or of course, always the other wonderful reflections on the quirky, wonderful place that is United.
Well, I came to United from a really wonky path. I was teaching in the medical school at the University of Minnesota, and I was a lawyer out of the president's office. And I'm Dakota. So as I'm entering my elder path, I'm required to give back, to do a give back to my Creator and all creation for all I've been given throughout my life. And we do what we call going up on the hill. You do a vision quest in order to find out what that give back is going to be. Well, so I did my going up on the hill, and since I had, multiple advanced degrees, I had a clear idea of what I was going to have as my give back, and it came back chaplaincy. And I was like, I can't be hearing you right? Oh, that can't be the case. And I went down to my camp, which is the people who pray for you while you're up on the hill, and they said, what kind of message did you get? And they said, chaplaincy. I'm like, what the hell, really? I got to go back to school? So I went first to, no offense, okay, but I went first to Bethel because it was close to home. And I thought, oh, I'll be burned at the stake here. This isn't going to work. Because I'm from the medicine wheel tradition, right? And so I went to Luther, and I'm old and I'm native, right? So I walked in and it felt like everybody was 10 years old and very, very, very white. I thought, this doesn't work. And I'd never heard of United. And somebody told me, well, you should try this seminary because it's probably one of the last ones you can try unless you have to move. So I walked in and I talked to Glenn Harrington Hall, who was the, Glenn. And I said, and he said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here to become a chaplain. He said, well, I'm going to talk to Joe Bush. So I went to talk to Joe, and he said, what are you here for? And I said, well, I'm here to become a chaplain. And he said, okay, so you're going to be ordained. And I said, I don't know, do you have to be ordained to be a chaplain? He said, well, yeah, you do. I said, okay, I'll be ordained. And he said, so what denomination are you? And I said, I don't know, do you have to have a denomination to be ordained? And he said, well, yeah. By then he was looking at me like I had 5 heads, right? And I said, I'm from the medicine wheel tradition. I'm a medicine woman in my tribe. I didn't have to be ordained, but this is what I'm supposed to do. So that's how I ended up coming to United. And it's been, out of 27 years of graduate education, this has been the highlight. This was the best experience I had because it was really an opportunity. I didn't have to not be Indian to be here. Even though they had an Indian program that they stopped the year before I came. Really? The timing was not great. But I didn't have to stop. I didn't have to shut up in class with Carolyn or anyone else when they would ask about your experience with the Bible, which I had none. Zero. I remember being in my CPE, my first CPE, and having them talk about Advent. And I said, "What's Advent?" And again, looked at me like I was nuts. And I said, "Well, what's a UEP ceremony?" And she looked at me and said, "I don't know what a UEP ceremony is." I said, "Well, I don't know what Advent is, but let's figure this out." So that's what United was. It was a place that you could be who you are. I could be who I was. I could bring whatever gifts and talents and abilities and hopes and dreams I had, and I could share with others who were on the same kind of wonky, confusing paths, and we could grow into a community and a faith community of individuals who have deep respect for one another. So that, although I did go to my committee for ordination, and when they asked what I intended to do, and I said I wanted to be an interspecies chaplain, they went a little nuts. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. I think we've got time for like one more question if folks, anybody have a question you'd like to ask these current and recent students?
I'm aware that when I started seminary in '95, that a big part of it was to make sure that you always had small groups to help with the process of understanding your faith journey and what the subject matters were in community. And I know that you all have been primarily working from a distance. And I've also served in churches and, of course, during COVID, doing a lot of Zoom meetings and things like that. Have you felt any sense of loss by not being able to physically rub shoulders with other people in community, in small groups and things like that? Or do you feel like it has been fully enhancing of your experience in seminary?
I mean, I can share that my first semester at United was in fall of 2020, and so everyone was virtual. So in some ways, that was a pretty particular way to enter the seminary experience. And certainly, I mean, the ways that faculty know to use breakout rooms or that sort of thing to really allow for those smaller conversations has been really helpful. Because I live in St. Paul and I can go to campus for class, and I typically do, I do get some of that kind of on-campus community, and I do miss that there are classmates that I only ever see on a screen, and don't have a sense of sharing space with them more casually. And I would say the flip side of that is that it's an incredible gift to have classmates whose contexts are so wildly different from mine, geographically and otherwise. I think that the sense of diversity of experience that brings into the United classroom is really, really remarkable. So while there are certainly drawbacks, I guess, or challenges to the fact that, you know, that Zoom is such a central part of the classroom experience, and so many students are distance students, there's also incredible gifts that come with that. And I don't know that I would want to sacrifice, you know, those gifts for yeah, for a different context where folks aren't bringing those experiences to.
As a totally distant student the entire time, I think there's always something gained for time in person with someone else, but you don't lose the richness of relationship. I have friends who will be my close confidants for the rest of my life who I've only ever experienced on Zoom, and I think it's as rich of a relationship as you would have in person.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I also wasn't thinking about it, but it is definitely the case that having people who have experiences just across the country and the world at times has been hugely beneficial to me. I'll also say that this United has I've benefited from United going out of their way to try to generate that sort of community for distant students. The breakout rooms definitely hugely helpful in classes, but in my case in particular, Reverend Hutt, who is no longer at United, Dr. Green, Dr. Chapman Labe, and a bunch of students in the Black student. I don't know what the name. It's the Black student group. I don't know if I had the name at the time, but at that group, my first semester, that group was so helpful. I probably wouldn't have stayed at United, not because of anything to do with United, but just because of like my own life. It was just hugely helpful for me, and I'm very thankful for that, because I wouldn't have stayed at the school if it wasn't for that. And no one in my in-person life was as helpful as that. So, I'm not so sure about this in person. Just kidding.
I will just add, I'd meant to mention this. There's something really, really sweet and delightful that happens too when you've been in class with somebody for years on Zoom, and then they show up for graduation and you see them in person for the first time. And it's like that greeting in that moment is so sweet and so lovely, and you're like, oh my God, you're that tall. It's just a really wonderful sense of reunion with someone you've never actually shared physical space with before.
Wonderful. Well, would you please join me in thanking our panel?